you want really good coffee to take on your next adventure, use CS Instant Coffee. You can find out more about them at csinstant.coffee.
Found ourselves in the middle of this war. Like, we saw people shot point blank right in front of us. We were hostages running from the Kyrgyz military for 6 days, and we had to abandon all of our food and warm clothing. We lost like 20 pounds of weight each.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we hear stories of adventure from every corner of the planet. We interview all sorts of folks who are using their sport to explore the world around them and give you the inspiration you need to get out there and have some fun. So today's episode is from late 2018. It was actually one of the first episodes I did, like right after I took over the podcast in 2018. And we were very lucky to be able to talk to Tommy Caldwell about his film, The Dawn Wall. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you checking it out. It's got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. And it's just an amazing film. And as you heard in the clip at the very beginning of the episode, Tommy's story is crazy. He was kidnapped, and he lost a finger at another time in life. For a climber, that's a big deal, of course, but he just got a crazy story. Great guy. We were very fortunate to talk to him, and this is definitely one of my favorite episodes, but it is a revisited episode because it's Thursday. We do revisited episodes on Thursday. And so, and also want to say thank you for making last month the best month of the show ever. We had way more downloads than usual, and this month is on track to do even better. So thank you. The show is growing. But anyway, back to Tommy. If you don't know who Tommy Caldwell is, he's one of the world's greatest climbers. And this project he did called the Dawn Wall will put him in the history books of the world of big wall climbing pretty much forever. He did a route that was essentially considered impossible, physically impossible. And he was able, with his partner, Kevin Jorgeson, to do this over 19 days. It was such a big deal in 2014 that President Obama tweeted about it and talked about it, saying how impressed he was, and it got news just all over the world. So really cool. So yeah, it was a lot of fun talking to him, and I hope you enjoy this episode, and thank you so much for listening in. There's a lot of shows out there now, so I really appreciate you taking time to listen to us. Anyway, have a great day, have a great weekend. Get out there, do something out in the woods, out in nature, and take a little break from this over-civilized world we live in. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Today we have an incredibly achieved climber, and he's actually come out with a movie lately called The Dawn Wall, and his name is Tommy Caldwell. Tommy, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, man. Before we get started, I hate to hog the airways, but I got a quick story. Last summer, I was climbing in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains down in southern Colorado, and I was going up to Crestone Needle, and it was dark. It was like 4 a.m, and there was these headlamps up above me, like, I don't know, quarter mile up to Broken Hand Pass, and I eventually catch up to these lights, and it was these 2 older guys, and they were really cool, and I ended up hanging out with them all day long. And one of them was just super fun to be around. And we get to talking, and he's kept saying, like, my son Tommy's done this and that. And I'm like, dang, your son's done that? And I'm like, who the heck is your son? And he's like, oh, by the way, my name's Mike Caldwell. I'm like, your son's Tommy Caldwell. And so me and your dad spent the day climbing together last summer. And man, he's a hoot.
Oh man, yeah, I hear that kind of story on almost a daily basis. Like, my dad seems to be everywhere all the time, and he makes an impression on everyone. And he shamelessly brags about me, which is a little bit hard at sometimes, but it's also a bit endearing,
Well, I'm sure you do the same thing with your kids. It's hard not to brag.
Yeah.
But he starts going up this route, which the guidebook specifically says don't. And I'm like, hey, Mike, you can't go that way. That's the way you don't go. And he's like, oh, well, I'm going off memory from 45 years ago. I was like, they got apps now with pictures in them. Like,
Yeah, that sounds about right. He still doesn't know how to use a cell phone. So,
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. But yeah, man, that was my only connection to you. But he was a great guy, great time. But you've been going around promoting your new movie called The Dawn Wall, about your climb up the Dawn Wall in Yosemite. How's it been going so far?
oh, it's been great. The making of the movie was kind of an interesting process because we filmed it for like 7 years, and then it took them like almost 3 years to do the post production. So for a long time, I was like, "Man, is this thing ever going to actually come out? Is it going to see the light of day?" But I'd also just written a book, and so I've never dove too deeply into the process of them making the movie. They're just good friends of mine, Big Up Productions and Sender Films. You know, the guys that run those companies are just good friends of mine. So I didn't ask too many questions. I just totally trusted them with the story, and so I didn't really know what the movie was going to be like. So when I saw it the first time at the South by Southwest Film Festival in Austin, Texas, it was with a crowd of like 400 people, and man, it like brought me back to all those experiences, and I was just so happy with it. Like those guys, did such a great job. So my trust was well placed.
So was that difficult seeing yourself on screen and like not knowing? I mean, that was the first time you said you saw it, so you just basically didn't know how they were telling the story.
Right. I mean, I'm used to seeing myself on screen because I've been doing video projects in one way or another since I was like, 16 years old. So that's like 25 years. But this story is different, it's really personal. It digs really deep. And so there's a few sections that are hard for me to watch, but yeah, for the most part, I was just excited. They did a good job.
Good, man. Yeah, it's an incredible film. I lived in Yosemite, and I just remember the story. It was awesome to see like the kind of the gathering that it started to get towards the end. And the biggest thing I noticed is when you finished, I was on Twitter and saw President Obama tweeted about it, and I'm like, holy crap, climbing got to the White House. How cool was that for you?
I mean, it was cool. I feel like it didn't make a whole lot of sense. I felt like it's one of these things that just go viral in the news and online for whatever reason. For a long time, I'm like, why were people so interested in this? Because it was so unplanned. Like we were telling the story to the climbing audience, but we didn't expect it to really go beyond that. And the fact that it went to the White House and the New York Times ran articles about it for 7 days, it was both really cool and very strange. Like topping out El Cap after being on the wall for 19 days and having reporters up there. Like it just felt weird. Actually, I wished I could have avoided that. But the whole experience has changed my life, or sort of the after experience of the Dawn Wall has changed my life and created opportunities in some pretty wonderful ways.
There's two big climbing movies out right now, and I'm sure there's been some people that's got some confusion from it. Did you and the makers of Free Solo, did y'all plan this, or did it just kind of happen?
No, I think we tried to avoid it, actually.
Well, you failed.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't work out. Like, I mean, I'm part of that Free Solo film, too. I'm like one of the characters in the movie. I'm one of Alex's best friends. I was involved in the filming of that movie, too. So we were all really aware of what each other were doing. And we're like, man, I hope it doesn't happen that these come out at exactly the same time. And then it just did. It just happened that way. And I think if you ask Josh Loyal, he's like, if there's one regret he had, he wished they would have figured out a way to get the movie out like a year earlier, or at least 6 months earlier, so they weren't right on top of each other.
Huh. So I guess it's kind of like a big ship. It's just kind of hard to steer once you got it on course. So once those release dates got out, it was kind of hard to change.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about film festival schedules.
Yeah.
And release plans, and there's so many people that get their fingers in there, and yeah, it was completely out of my control.
So, with them both being out together, and yeah, you're in both films, like obviously in yours a lot, but also in Alex's, you're in there quite a bit, and that's even me, who's involved in the world, was a little confused at the beginning. I was like, what in the world? But I feel like Free Solo is a really easy message to get across, because it's like, I'm just climbing a rock with nothing, with no gear. How would you explain it, like in really simple terms, like the impact of what you did versus something that's just easy to explain, like climbing a rock with no rope?
I mean, it's a little bit hard to explain even the impact of what I did because like I said, I thought it was so niche. I mean, it was very exciting to me personally because in the world of big wall free climbing, this was like the biggest thing, but the world of big wall free climbing is really small
Right.
generally.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, just like how I progressed, how I climbed the easiest routes on El Cap, and then I started putting up my own, and then I went other places in the world, and then I got to this place where I wanted to find something that was just going to challenge me way above and beyond anything else. The Dawn Wall was the biggest, most badass, blankest big wall in the world, but you have to know the nuances of big wall climbing to really understand that. I thought you would have to know the nuances, but I think the part that caught the interest of so many people was like the story of brotherhood and the fact that we were up there for so long. Like we just happened to come across this format for storytelling where we're 19 days, people could go online and they could see what we're doing. And by the end, it was live streamed on TV. And there was these really cool underlying messages of like belief and sort of the tenacity that it took and the brotherhood. Like in the end, the whole story of me like not wanting to go to the top without Kevin and actually sort of deciding that I wasn't going to and really putting my own success on the line. Like that spoke to people in this way. So I think the story is really about that more than it is about the actual climbing.
How long have you been thinking about this wall before you did it?
I mean, I had toyed with the idea. I would say starting in like 2006 or 2007, I sort of started to look over at that part of the wall and just been like, I wonder if that's possible to climb that. And then in 2008, I started to aid climb around, swing around on ropes and feel the holds and start to sort of piece it together. And then in 2009, I spent a lot of the year really, really trying to pin it down. And so, starting in 2009, I worked on it pretty vigorously all the way until we did it in 2000, like 14, 15. We did it right as the new year came.
Gosh, man.
So, it was a really long process. It was like really 7 dedicated years of work.
That's overwhelming, honestly. I don't think anyone would intuitively just think that it would take that long to prepare for, but it does.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of took so long because we failed over and over again.
Well, yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd done so many other routes on El Cap that were easier that took me like a month, and then this one took 7 years, and it was just because it was so much harder. So I had to get better. We had to change our logistics. We had to change our strategy. We had to memorize every little intricacy of every little move, and so it was kind of like learning a language. An insane amount of memorization and rehearsal, and yeah, I think that's what intrigued me in the end. I was like, man, can you? If you get so obsessed about one singular thing, is that gonna, does that work?
So what was the most difficult aspect of making it happen? Was it like was it a part of logistics? Was it relationships? Or was it timing, money? Like for you, what was like the biggest, basically the crux of making it happen?
I mean, I think it was, I don't know. That's a good question, actually. Nobody's asked that specific question. I think it was probably, I mean, all those things you just mentioned were definite cruxes, and they kind of all added up to make it really difficult. I think maybe to sum it up, it's like building the belief and sort of like the resolve that it was worth it no matter the outcome. Like that's how we were able to keep going back for so long, because I loved the process so much, and I felt like it was like teaching me a lot, and I was growing as a human being in a way that I had decided it was going to be worth it, even if we failed in the end.
So I'll tell you something that's really difficult for me is group projects, and I have to do a lot of them with the work I do.
Right.
Was this difficult being basically a really giant group project with your partner?
Yes, that was definitely difficult because we're just different personalities. When we were climbing together, it was amazing, but Kevin had a hard time with the belief side of it too. And like, you know, he doubted whether it was worth it to come back. So he gave up on a lot of occasions, and I would have to gather other partners.
How did that feel for you? I mean,
it was super frustrating at times. Like I would write these epically long emails to him, trying to get him to like take ownership of the project a bit more, and and try to get him psyched up. And sometimes that would work, and then other times I would just have this like empathetic view of like, well, what am I asking him to do? Like, because I was very excited about the project the entire time. I had doubts, but really when it came to that fall season, every year I couldn't wait to get back there. I think Kevin went about it with a lot more sort of dread. He was like, man, this is so much work. Like, what am I doing? Am I just wasting my life away? And I didn't want to, have him feel like he was wasting his life away, and then have it not work out in the end. So there was a lot of dynamics that were tricky with the partnership, I would say.
Yeah.
But at the same, we were. It was a pretty amazing brotherhood too, in a lot of ways. Like that doubt is sort of part of adventure. Like if you're, in big mountain climbing and expedition climbing, like doubt is a huge part of it, and that's, it adds drama, it adds excitement in a way that's very necessary.
Yeah, well, especially for a movie, but not always. The drama, man, is not always very pleasant for your anxiety levels, but it makes for a great story afterwards. So can I ask you this? How did you go about the process of choosing a partner? And why did you feel you wanted one if there were times you could have kept going without him?
Yeah, that just happened really kind of organically. I at first I decided I was going to work on the route alone. And I had kind of devised these rope systems over the years using special devices where I could fix ropes on the route and mostly work on it alone. And then my plan was to occasionally rally friends or family, to come and belay me to help me work on sections that I couldn't work on alone. And then in the end, I would just get a friend to come up and belay me for a couple weeks. And I'd done lots and lots of routes on El Cap that way. So on the Dawn Wall, I spent about a year working on it alone, and it was a pretty lonely process, honestly, and it was hard to really keep that belief that it was possible because it was so hard. And then just one day, out of the blue, Kevin called me up. Actually, he called me up because Sender Films, Big Up Productions, they put out a little short 20-minute video piece on the project. Like I'd given up on it, and then they called me and they said, we would like to make a video about this to kind of put it out there to the next generation, because if you're not going to do this project, we should let people know it is what it is, because it's the future. So I went up there with him for a week with about 4 filmers, and they were all my best friends. And I had so much fun up there with the four other people. Like we were partying up on the wall, and all of a sudden that group energy was making it so I was able to do sections of the route that I hadn't been able to do in the previous year. And so I started to think like I need to get more people up here. It needs to be sort of a collaboration, a teamwork effort. So a few months later, that video was released, and Kevin saw the video and he thought it looked cool, and so he called me up. And he was a boulderer. He wasn't a big wall climber at all, but he had a reputation for being a really hard worker and a good guy. And he asked if I would just show him what it was all about. And so sort of got excited about the idea of mentoring him or mentoring somebody. And so we went up and we started climbing on the route together, and our partnership formed and the belief built. And, before we knew it, we were both fully in it.
So what was your confidence going into it, like getting on the wall?
It would vary. I'm like kind of absurdly optimistic when it comes to climbing projects. Like I just have this way of looking at them where I'm like, we're going to go as hard as we can, no matter what. And I think this is possible. And, a lot of times I fail, but I don't really think about that too much in the process. So, Kevin would always look at me and be like, how are you so optimistic about this thing? Like it seems so ridiculous. And, but but I think I just really enjoy the process so much that I want to be up there no matter what.
Time for a quick message break. CS Instant Coffee is definitely the best instant coffee I've ever had. In fact, just out of convenience and how good it tastes, I decided for the last year I've been taking it on every single adventure I go on, from backpacking to bike tours, just from convenience sake. It's really high quality and it keeps me from having to take a bunch of other equipment out in the woods. But it's not just for going out on adventures. My wife actually takes some to work every single day with her. She takes a couple packs to refill her coffee mug as a teacher. She doesn't have a ton of time to have to make fresh coffee all the time, so she just needs a little hot water, can pour the coffee in, and she's ready to go for her next class and not waste a lot of time. So if you're crunched for time in your job, I would definitely suggest giving it a shot, because they have been huge supporters of the show for the last year, and I really appreciate everything they've done for us, and it would mean a lot to me to go support them. So if you're interested, go to csinstant.coffee and support those who are supporting the show. It would go a long way. Thank you. All right, let's get back to the episode. Was there ever a time that you felt like this just isn't going to happen? Like it's going to fail. We can't do this.
Yeah. When my wife and I decided to have our first child, I didn't think that I could fit the Dawn Wall into my life.
And how long ago was that?
With a new baby. He's 5, so that was. Now he's 5 years old. So that he was like 2.5 or I guess 2 years old when we did the climb. So 2012, I guess, was when I had that kid, and I was like, we're not going to be able to go back and climb this thing. And so in 2011, I gave it a big attempt. And Kevin bailed that year. He decided that let's see, what was the deal? That year he had sprained his ankle really early in the season, and we'd kind of decided that was going to be our last season no matter what, because he was just fatigued from the whole project anyways. Then when he sprained his ankle, I was like, I can't stop this project right now because I'm going to have a baby pretty soon, and I'm not going to be able to come back to the Dawn Wall. Who knows when I'm going to be able to get back here. And so that season was just really heavy. So my wife came up on the wall with me that year and belayed me. My dad came up for a bunch of time, and I gave it everything I had without Kevin, just by rallying other people after Kevin sprained his ankle. And I failed. And so, yeah, it was heavy. I was like, man, I've worked on this thing for like 5 years at this point, and I just failed. But within, I would say, 2 weeks after that failed attempt, my wife actually came to me and she's like, man, this means a lot to you, and I like the idea of bringing our new kid to Yosemite and living there for a couple months at a time if need be. I think we can make this work. And so it was really her that encouraged me to go back.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, because there's a lot of people in this boat, and frankly, I'm about 6 months away from being in this boat.
Oh, nice. Congrats.
Yeah,
Congrats.
It wasn't difficult for me so far. How has having children changed the way you pursue your sport? Has it been a positive or negative effect? I'll just make it that simple.
I mean, both. I would say. So I have a friend, Josh Warden, who's got a child that's about a year younger than my younger son Fitz. And he and I both had like our best climbing years ever, like the same, like in the year after our child was born.
Wow.
So I climbed. So I guess Fitz was only a year and a half old when I completed the Dawn Wall. So maybe I should say it was a year and a half. But I did both the Fitz Traverse and the Dawn Wall in that year that Fitz was a little baby. And so we have this theory that you've got like a year and a half of like superhuman powers when you have your first kids. You better make the most of it. But I think functionally what happens is like when you have a kid, you're like, oh gosh, how's this going to change my life? And you fear that you're going to lose the things that you really, really cherish. Like you lose some of the things that you really cherish, or those are going to change. So for me, that made me, it made me sort of like become way more productive and just up my game in life for a couple of years. I was just on hyperdrive. Every moment of every day was full and counted, and it made me care about it a little bit more because I would always think about how I wanted my son Fitz to see the world, and I wanted him to see it with this kind of wonder and passion. And I thought, where did I get that? And I was like, it's through climbing, it's through things like the Dawn Wall, it's through this travel. So I need to be that example to him. And so that made me really care about those things that much more. And it was really helpful, kind of emotionally, but logistically it is way more difficult.
Well, logistics seem like one of your strengths, so you got that going for you.
Yeah, I mean, not always. I mean, there's always struggles, and finding the time to do it all is hard. But I think the reason to do it is just so strong now, because we want to create these good lives for our kids, and we want to. If you want your kid to live a full life, you need to be doing the same thing.
You know, that's really good. That reminds me, there's this guy a couple years ago that was running the Boston Marathon, and he led the marathon, the first place for like the first 2 miles, only because he sprinted, which is a horrible like strategy, but it allowed his 2-year-old to see him on TV, and that was the whole reason he did it. And now he's kind of famous for that, which is, you know, he wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for his small child. So I could see how that could be a pretty amazing motivation to do things you would never do in the first place.
Yeah. The hard part of it, though, is there's a certain amount of risk involved in the styles of climbing that I do, and I was sort of venturing more and more towards big mountain expedition climbing, and I just don't see dying as an option anymore. So I assess risk way differently. I'm not going into the big scary mountains with big glaciers hanging above my head and stuff. I draw these very distinct risk lines differently than I did before I had a child. But honestly, that helped on the Dawn Wall, because I never felt like the Dawn Wall was that risky. It was that thing in my life that fulfilled the need for adventure and challenge, but I felt really, really certain that I wasn't going to die on it, because it's clean rock, and there's no avalanches, and compared to a lot of the other types of climbing that I do, the Dawn Wall was incredibly safe.
So you're not going to be free soloing the nose anytime soon?
No.
Okay. Well, good. So, going back, this was a process. This was not a trajectory to success that's nice and smooth. And if you go back and look at your story from the beginning, it's kind of been that thread all the way through. You've had some pretty harrowing experiences early on in life. Do you mind us talking about that a little bit?
No.
Okay. You got into climbing pretty early on, had a knack for it, got really good, and you took a trip to Kyrgyzstan where, some pretty crazy stuff went down. How life-changing was that experience for you? Because you said the Dawn Wall's life-changing. I imagine that experience was also another one of those pivotal moments.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the experience in Kyrgyzstan was more life-changing than the Dawn Wall. Yeah, I mean, it was life-changing in so many ways. I mean, I guess I should probably give a real brief synopsis. It was my first big international climbing expedition. I was 21 years old. I was basically just following my girlfriend at the time, Beth Rodden. She was a North Face athlete. She was a North Face sponsored athlete, and I weaseled my way onto the trip as being a rigger for the photography, because it was a trip that was supposed to create photos for them to use in advertising. And so I wasn't a North Face athlete, but I managed to get myself onto the trip, and we helicoptered into this remote region in Kyrgyzstan. And that year of 2000, it became it got invaded by a rebel group called the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, and it seemed really unlikely. It was like 30 miles from the nearest road. We're at this dead end valley. We knew that there was a little bit of a risk of like rebel activity in the area, but we had kind of figured that if we climbed up this dead end valley, it wouldn't happen. But the rebels figured out that we were there when they showed up, and then they came, and we were camped in a portaledge 1,000 feet up a wall. They came with these long range assault rifles and shot up at us, and that was our signal to come down, and we got taken hostage for 6, crazy days. A rebel group, or the Kyrgyz military, invaded the valley to try and fight this rebel group, and so we found ourselves in the middle of this war. Like, we saw people shot point blank right in front of us. We were hostages running from the Kyrgyz military for 6 days, and we had to abandon all of our food and warm clothing. We lost like 20 pounds of weight each, because we're in this high mountain region without much clothing, on the verge of hypothermia. And it was just one of these experiences that was so intense that it's never felt. There's nothing else in life to compare it to. Like, it seems surreal. It's always seems surreal. Even in the moment, it seems surreal, and then even today, I'm thinking back about it, it seems surreal. But what it did for me is it made life real tangible. Like, you when you're that close to death, you understand how important life is, and how much you want to do in life. And so I came out of the experience, traumatized in a lot of ways, but also with sort of like this bigger reserve for living life to its fullest. I had all this energy, like in my climbing, things like pain and fear. It warped those things completely. Like, going up on El Cap after that experience didn't seem painful at all or scary. I was able to use that to my advantage, and maybe the most profound positive effect that Kyrgyzstan had on me is that we endured for 6 days, and probably on day 5, I felt this sort of coming to life. Like, we didn't have any food, and you would think that you would just get progressively weaker and weaker. But on day 5, all of a sudden, I felt flooded with energy. I felt alive in this way that I almost had never had. And it was this survival instinct that kicked in. And so a lot of my climbing ever since then has been sort of an effort to understand that more, because I'm like, we have this ability as humans to survive and really operate at a really high level. And we don't understand that unless we're forced into that situation. And we were forced into that situation in Kyrgyzstan. And so I've kind of wanted to find ways to get back there. And I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to pick these goals and work so hard on them, because, on one hand, they don't hurt and they're not scary. And on the other hand, there's just this deep curiosity inside of me to find out more about that.
Who do you think you'd be if Kyrgyzstan never happened?
That's hard to say. I was sort of on the verge of, I probably would have pursued climbing still, but not nearly as good or successful or cared as much about it. And I probably would have been a bit more of a generalist, outdoorsy kind of person who worked in the industry. I'm sure the professional side of climbing wouldn't have lasted super long for me. So who knows? Maybe I would have been like a sales rep or worked at an outdoor store or something like that. Definitely that experience just sort of upped my level of living. Like, I certainly wouldn't have written a book or, built a house. Like, I'm always looking for these big goals and working really, really hard towards them. And I just wasn't that way before Kyrgyzstan.
Man, yeah. So that's something that you were thrown into that you weren't really planning on. Have there been any other moments like that since then? I know that you said with the Donwell, there were times it didn't seem likely. And, there's a lot of things out of your control with your partner's emotions and abilities. But in the end, things went great. Have there been any other experiences like that you can think of?
Yeah, I chopped off my finger a few years later, and this was at a time in life when I was really trying to make it as a professional climber, so that's a pretty hard thing.
Yeah, not long after Kyrgyzstan either, right?
Yeah, that was like, I was just on the rebound from Kyrgyzstan. I was really getting back into it, and then I chopped off my finger, and I was primarily doing a style of climbing that was super finger strength intensive, bouldering, sport climbing, kinds of things that you would never think would work with one less finger.
Well, yeah, I actually have never heard any, not details, but like the story behind that. I always hear it in passing, but what happened to your finger? And what did that make you feel like when it happened? How quickly did it set in? Like, oh crap, my climbing career is in jeopardy.
Yeah, so I was working on a home remodel project, just using my parents' old table saw, which I didn't really know how to use, and that's how I chopped it off. I chopped it off with the table saw, and literally, like instantaneously, what went into my mind was like, "Oh my God, I just ended like my climbing," because that's what I was focused. So much of who I was focused on climbing. Like I had all this motivation and these aspirations. It was also kind of my way to cope with hard things like Kyrgyzstan. Like I would just go into the mountains and go climbing, and all of a sudden I was like, I've lost this, and so it created a lot of fear in me. But over time, that fear kind of turned into resolve, I guess. And so Kyrgyzstan gave me a big boost. Weirdly, my finger did the same thing. In terms of like physically how I climbed, I just became way more dedicated. I started to,
Isn't that funny?
yeah, I started to think about my diet. I started to train in all these specific ways. I started to, yeah, make schedules, and I just worked really, really hard. And I've always found that I thrive in those situations. Like when life sort of forces me into these things that are hard, it makes me just kind of rise to that occasion, and I'm sort of addicted to that in a way. And sometimes it's negative things like getting kidnapped or chopping off my finger that forces that, but climbing in general just does that. It's like climbing's hard, it hurts. You go to these mountains and you plan to do something that's going to put you through a lot of misery because it's going to bring you to life. And maybe my ability to go through things like Kyrgyzstan and my finger and have such a positive outcome was because I've been climbing my whole life. It's kind of like climbing as a child with my dad was good training for sort of the adversity of life.
And so is there adversity in your life that isn't so dramatic, like maybe mundaneness or responsibilities of being a father, that are also adversity, but it just in a different way?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think everybody's life has got all sorts of adversity. I like to joke that like the hardest part of my year is going and visiting the grandparents in Florida. Because
that's where I'm from, man. Come on.
Yeah, we sit around, we go to the pool, we play cards, and I get kind of bored.
Where in Florida do y'all go? Just curious.
We go to Fort Myers.
That's where my father-in-law lives. We're going to be there in a couple of weeks, man. That's so funny. Yeah, it's a totally different world, but in a way, that's an adversity. That's like, how do I break out of this?
Yeah, I think I only thought of that because you're like the mundaneness of life. I was like, usually my life is not at all mundane. That's probably the only example I could think of.
That's funny, man.
But yeah, having a kid, it's a big challenge, and I don't know. I think I'd take all these challenges, and I just, they're like little battles that can kind of bring you to life in a way.
Well, I mean, that's obviously, you got to have that attitude to do some of the things you've done, despite some of the things that have happened. Is there ever a time you just don't feel like fighting anymore? Do you ever get really down and don't want to try?
For me, that is probably more fleeting than for most people. I would say, like my friends are always like, man, how are you so optimistic, or how are you, always motivated and always going? Like I do have a lot of energy, for that kind of thing.
So where do you think that came from?
I mean, I think all the crazy stuff I've been to, and having a father that just sort of that raised me in a way that just created a lot of passion. There's a lot of exciting things. This world of climbing and travel, there's always so much cool, exciting stuff going on. It's easy to be a super energetic person in that world. I think my biggest challenge is there's too many great things going on. Like I want to go on big expeditions, but I also want to teach my kids how to ski, and there's just balancing that is my challenge. It's really not about getting bored ever.
It's a little bit frustrating how much there is to do, like that you could get into.
Yes.
I just in the state alone, there's so many different sports that I want to try that I just don't have like time or money for. So many places, and it's almost like you could drive yourself crazy trying to think of all you haven't done yet.
Yes, yeah. So I tend to just pick the try and pick the things that I care the most about and pursue those.
Interesting. So do having kids, like, does it draw your attention back down to these little details, like a leaf on the ground versus the dawn wall?
Yeah, it creates those quiet moments for sure. I mean, I love trying to look at the world through the eyes of my kids. Yeah, I mean, I think in my book I wrote a lot about that actually. Those first few months when my son Fitz was born. My daughter Ingrid was born, as I was writing the book, so she's not really in the book too much. But my son Fitz was born, and we would just like sit in a cap meadow and look at the clouds and talk about the animals and look at the little blades of grass, and it created these kind of tender, quiet moments, which are quite magical as well.
So you do this. What's next for Tom and Caldwell?
I mean, I'm trying to just like continue the awesome life. Like this year, I'm home right now momentarily, but for pretty much this whole year, starting about 3 months ago, we're living on the road full time, traveling with the family, trying to experience as much as we can before they, auger into the public schools, before our kids auger into the public school system. So we're traveling as much as we can. We're climbing tons. We're, trying to world school our kids. Some people call it homeschooling, but I like to call it world schooling, because we're studying languages of the countries we're in, or we're studying the geology of Yosemite Valley, or the animals in Yellowstone. Like wherever we are, that's the school for our kids right now, and that's really fun. I think our motivation to do this is really to just show them how vast and incredible the world can be, so it builds energy in them the same way my dad did in me when I was young. So yeah, it's really so much about the family, but kind of merged with the things that we love most, which are kind of travel and climbing and good people.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's really cool. And so, after they get to a certain age, you guys will settle, let them go to school, let them make friends, build a life for a little bit.
Probably, yeah, most likely. I mean, the life of constant travel is amazing, and who knows? We might decide to do that more than a year. But I think, like, since we've been doing it for 3 months, we're realizing a few things. Like it's pretty tough, because you just don't have any comfort. So it's tiring, living in a van with 2 small kids. You don't end up sleeping that much, and they don't end up sleeping that much. And it just creates a little bit more conflict in life. So you're definitely enduring a lot, but you're also experiencing so much more. So I think what we've decided is it's really good for a time, for like a year, but who knows, maybe we'll get so addicted to it that we'll continue it for another year. I was a little worried about the social side of it for our children, like traveling so much. I was worried about keeping them away from their friends. But what we found is there's this community of climbers that are doing the same thing. And everywhere we go, we meet families, and we're actually, the kind of global community of climbers feels like home for me more than my community at home. And so that part of it's been really cool.
Yeah, that's really unexpected, but there's enough people doing it to, kind of like snowbirds in Florida. We just get an influx of basically old people, and they all know each other because they all live up there together and they all come down together. So it's really just the transition that's the only time they're alone. But anywhere they station themselves, they're usually surrounded by people they know. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We're starting that journey soon, so it's good to get a little advice.
Is this your first kid?
First one ever.
All right, nice.
Yeah,
well,
man.
Hold on for the ride. Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing experience.
Dude, that's kind of been the mindset. It's just like, I'm not like super excited in the sense of like, oh my God, this was like my life's dream. But I'm almost like, I'm really stoked to show this kid everything that I've learned, and hopefully set them off to go learn their own stuff. I think that aspect of it will be really exciting.
Yeah, and I think living in this world of adventures, that's going to be the lens you view raising a child through. It's just a big adventure, and you can kind of make of it what you wish. And it's going to be hard, but that's kind of what makes it rich. So
yeah, I mean,
you should be excited.
Everything that, yeah, exactly. Just everything that's been hard is, well, everything I'm proud of has been hard. So,
Yeah.
well, man, that's all the questions I have.
Oh, no worries. No, it's nice conversation. So
Yeah,
pleasure
man.
to be on the show.
Yeah, well, tell your dad I said hello. I'm sure he doesn't remember me, but if he remembers climbing with some tall, red bearded guy last summer.
Okay. Right on. Yeah, he probably will remember you. He remembers almost everybody. So I'll let him know.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
Okay. You have a good one.
All right, you too, Tommy. See ya.
Bye.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.